Chapter 11. The Dream. The beauty of summer came again to the Arctic. The ice receded, and people saw the whales heading north in great numbers. Thousands of geese, cranes, and ducks returned, all seeing their nesting grounds. Murr and Puffin came back to their nests in the cliffs as they had done for hundreds of years. But in the village, things were different. Each Sabbath, Yuki and his grandmother walked across the now snow-free ground to the Campbell's house, where many of the people of the village assembled to worship the God of their ancestors. Mrs. Campbell gathered the children around the kitchen table and taught them wonderful stories from the Bible, while the adults met in the living room. Later at the church service, Mr. Campbell opened the Bible and told the people about the Creator, the great Creator God, and his love for the people of the island. Yuki remembered his grandfather's last words to him. The great Creator God has given me a precious gift in you. Take good care of my wife. You are the man of the family now that I am gone. The boy took this charge seriously. When the men of the village brought meat from a hunt, he was there to receive a share for his grandmother. One summer morning, Yuki told his grandmother, I would like to go to grandfather's cabin along the east shore on the way to Savunga. I will be back in 5 days. Grandmother sat quietly with her head bent as she pulled a long sinew, thread made of walrus intestine, through a hole she had made in his skin parka. Finally she answered, Yuki, your grandfather was a good man. He had a good heart. You will soon be a man, and you have the same good heart. You go, but please be careful. I will wait for your return. The next morning, as Yuki started to slip quietly out the door, he saw something standing upright in the doorway. Picking it up, he lovingly caressed the shiny long shaft. It was a beautiful spear, the end tipped with a carefully carved piece of ivory. He knew it had belonged to grandfather, who had carried it with him everywhere he went. When he glanced up, he saw grandmother standing in the room watching him. She smiled and nodded. Yuki clutched it tightly and hurried over to the dog lot. After feeding the dogs, he carefully placed two large pouches, attached by wide bands of skin, on Nansen's back. In the packs was everything Yuki would need for his trip. Holding his spear, he and his faithful companion began the trek along the east side of the lake. The sun climbed higher in the rosy sky, burning away the mist. It was going to be a beautiful day, and Yuki was happy to be by himself. He climbed the steep mountain to the east and descended to the beautiful beach along the north shore. Nansen ran along the water's edge, chasing birds and mice as the days slipped away. At a stream, Yuki stood silently, watching for a fine, fat northern trout to swim by. But the trout were quick, and it took patience and many attempts with grandfather's spear before he caught one. The sun dipped close to the western horizon when he arrived at grandfather's cabin. The weathered cabin had been built many years ago when Yuki's father was a boy. It stood along the route to Savunga, on a beautiful stretch of beach between the sea and a small lake with emerald green water. Grandfather loved to come to this place to be alone and think. Yuki built a fire outside the cabin in an ancient fire pit and cooked his fish. He shared half with Nansen and then sat and watched the endless expanse of ocean and sky. For a long time he gazed at the Arctic beauty and thought, it is so easy when I am here to believe the great Creator God made all this. As he stared into the dying embers of the fire, he tried to hold in his mind a picture of grandfather sitting across from him at the fire. Without even thinking about it, he silently sent a prayer upward. Creator God, you must have loved Grandfather very much, for look how you used him to help so many people to know who you are. Do you think you might be able to use me like that when I grow up? Finally, Yuki went inside to lie down on his grandfather's bed. The bed still carried the faint smell of his grandfather. I wonder, Yuki thought sleepily, if the Creator God is like grandfather. The next day, Yuki hunted along the beach for sea peaches and speared another fat trout for supper. Whales played along the shore, sometimes rising high out of the water and falling back with a mighty splash. Grandfather had said they did it to rid themselves of barnacles that attached themselves to the skin. However, Yuki liked to think that they did it for fun. As he walked along the beach, he suddenly stopped and sniffed the air and listened. Everything was unusually quiet. He turned, glanced up at the sky to the north, then with Nansen at his heel, raced for the cabin, arriving just as the first gust of wind from an advancing storm blew him through the door. By evening, the cabin was bathed in a dark, eerie light as the storm raged outside in full force. The wind howled and the little cabin shook. Yuki sat with his back to the rattling door, gazing at the little fire he had built. Nonsense seemed on edge, pacing back and forth. Nonsense, Yuki scolded. Stop it! Come over here and lay down. Nonsense obeyed, but soon got up to prowl round the edges of the cabin. Suddenly, he let out a fierce growl and faced the door behind Yuki. At the same instant, the door crashed open and the shadow of a man filled the doorway. Yuki swirled around to confront a tall, angular man. His clothes were worn and dirty, and his hair was matted and dripping wet. Rabat! Yuki gasped. The shaman slightly gazed at him. It was the first time Yuki had seen him since he had disappeared more than a year ago. Hunters had told of seeing him on the south end of the islands, but he had stayed away from all people since his recovery from his sickness. Rabat entered the cabin, closed the door, and stood staring at the boy and his dog. Nansen growled and sulked behind Yuki's back. The boy continued to sit, scarcely daring to breathe. Finally, Rabat moved over to the fire, sat down, and helped himself to some of the leftover fish. After he had eaten, he began to speak slowly, staring sometimes at Yuki and other times off into space. He started haltingly. Many years ago, when I was about your age, I dreamed I was sitting on a rock on the top of a hill looking at the ocean. It was a dark night, but the stars were shining. And as I looked, a beautiful being appeared. He was shining from head to foot and walked without touching the ground. I was very afraid until I saw that all of the animals came to him and were not afraid. He stopped to talk with them and pet them. Rabat paused and relived the experience in his mind. He closed his eyes and was quiet for several moments before he continued. His eyes were like flames, and when he glanced at me, I felt he knew everything about me. Yet as he came close to me and looked at me, his eyes were full of love and kindness. The being didn't say anything to me, yet I knew deep inside that he loved me deeply. As I watched, he slowly disappeared. For many years, I have carried this dream in my heart. I never told anyone. When I became a man, I chose not to believe this being to be the Creator God. If I believed that he was the Creator God, I knew he was to be worshipped, and I could not be a shaman. I never liked your grandfather because he believed in the Creator God. But sometimes I saw that same look in his eyes as I had seen in my dream, and it made me afraid. For many years I refused to believe that dream. Then Mr. and Mrs. Campbell took care of me and healed me of my sickness. Deep inside, I knew the Creator God they worshipped was the same being that had appeared to me. I could see him living in their lives. It was the same love I felt from this being. The Campbells looked at me in the same way. I had to go away and think about these things. That is why I spent the winter on the south side of the island. But I was not lonely, because there I found the Creator God. It was quiet in the cabin except for the crackling of the fire. Yuki sat in wonder. Could this be the powerful shaman that he feared so much? Rabat began to speak again. One spring I had another dream. The same Creator God appeared to me, but this time when he came close, he pointed to a small group of people on the island. They were meeting each week to worship him. Then he did a strange thing. He held out a large white flat stone. There were 10 things written on it. 4 were on the left side and 6 on the right. A shadow covered the fourth on the left side. It was all dark, but as I watched, it began to shine brighter than all the others. I didn't understand what this meant, yet I wasn't afraid. For many years, I have kept the first dream in my heart because I didn't want to understand. Your grandfather knew about the Creator God's love. Now I understand. I didn't then, but I do now. Rabat turned to Yuki with tears in his eyes. There are many things I don't understand, but I want to learn. Will you help me, Yuki? Chapter 12 Epilogue. The warm midsummer sun shone down one Sabbath afternoon on a small group of people from the village as they stood by the shore of the Bering Sea. Children dashed here and there, finding little treasures that washed ashore. Many people had arrived by the boat from Savunga to witness this occasion. Yuki smiled at Nathan Ngongwak, who had also come. Mr. Campbell began to speak to the waiting people. This is a happy day, he said. The angels in heaven are here on this special day. Not only is the Holy Sabbath the day when God rested after he created this world, but it is also a day when many of you have chosen to be baptized. Turning, he smiled at the villagers waiting to enter the cold water of the sea. Yuki stood with his sister Puni, his father, his mother, and his grandmother. How proud grandfather would have been to see his family all ready to join those who worshipped the Creator God. A number of other people also prepared to give their hearts to Jesus. At the end of the line stood a tall, angular man in a clean, new sealskin suit. It was Rabat. Yuki turned to him and smiled. Yuki was the first to step into the cold water. As he was being lowered into the water, he said, This is for you, grandfather. This is for you.